I knew my husband could be cold, but I didn't know he wanted me dead until he accidentally pushed me down the basement stairs at our anniversary dinner. The guests gasped, my mother-in-law smiled, and as I lay there with my leg twisted wrong, I heard him whisper to the paramedic, "She's always been clumsy." But the insurance investigator who called the next morning asked me a question that changed everything. "Mrs. Chen, did you know your husband increased your life insurance policy to $2 million last month?" I grew up believing marriage was supposed to be a partnership. My parents had that kind of love, quiet, steady, the kind where they finished each other's sentences and laughed at jokes no one else understood. When I met David Chen at a fundraiser in Boston, I thought I'd found the same thing. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. Dark eyes that held your attention, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked in finance, spoke 3 languages, and had the kind of confidence that made people listen when he talked. I was 28, working as a pediatric nurse, and still naive enough to believe that love conquered everything. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, flowers delivered to the hospital where I worked. My friends were jealous. My parents were cautious. "He's very charming, Lily," my mother said one afternoon over tea. "But do you know who he is when no one's watching?" I thought I did. I thought the private David, the one who called me late at night just to hear my voice, who remembered how I took my coffee, who cried at our wedding, was the real one. I didn't know then that performance and reality could look identical until you were trapped inside the difference. The first year of marriage was smooth. We moved into a beautiful townhouse in Beacon Hill, the kind with original crown molding and a garden out back. David's career was thriving. I worked long shifts at the hospital, but came home to candlelit dinners and thoughtful gifts. His mother, Constance, visited often, always impeccably dressed, always watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You take such good care of my son," she'd say, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "He's lucky to have found someone so devoted." Devoted, the word felt like both a compliment and a warning. The small things started shifting around our second anniversary. David began commenting on my weight. "Just looking out for you," he'd say, pinching my waist. He'd invite me to dinner and then criticize what I ordered. He'd suggest I skip dessert, then act hurt when I got upset. "I'm trying to help, Lily. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That word became a weapon he wielded with surgical precision. Then came the accidents, small at first, a shove that made me stumble on the stairs. "Sorry, didn't see you there." A door that closed too quickly, catching my hand. "You should have moved faster." A grip on my arm that left bruises shaped like fingerprints. "You bruise so easily. Maybe you should take vitamins." Each time, Constance was nearby, watching, saying nothing. And each time, I told myself it was unintentional. David was stressed, work was demanding, I was overreacting. But 3 months ago, something changed. David became attentive again, almost obsessively so. He planned elaborate dates, bought me jewelry I didn't ask for, talked about our future with an enthusiasm that felt slightly manic. "We should update our wills," he said one morning over breakfast. "Make sure we're both protected." I signed the papers he put in front of me, trusting him the way you trust someone who promised to love you forever. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't ask questions. And that trust, I would learn, was exactly what he was counting on. For our 5th anniversary, David insisted on hosting a dinner party at our home. "Something intimate," he said, "just close friends and family." Constance helped him plan everything, the menu, the guest list, the seating arrangements. I was barely consulted, but I told myself it was sweet that they wanted to surprise me. The night of the party, I wore a navy dress David had bought me, the kind that hugged in all the wrong places, but he said made me look elegant. The house glowed with candlelight. 20 guests mingled in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Constance arrived in diamonds and silk, kissing David's cheek and barely acknowledging me. "Lovely party, darling," she said to him. To me, she offered a tight smile. "That dress is interesting." David squeezed my hand, but not in comfort, in warning. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, course after course, each more elaborate than the last. I barely tasted any of it. Something felt wrong, the same way you sense a storm coming before the sky changes. David kept refilling my wine glass, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and Constance watched me from across the table with an expression that looked almost hungry. After dessert, David stood and tapped his glass with a fork. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, his voice warm and practiced. "5 years ago, I married the love of my life, and tonight I want to show her something special I've been working on." He took my hand and led me toward the basement door. "I've been renovating the wine cellar," he said. "A surprise for you." The guests followed, curious and wine-drunk, their chatter filling the narrow hallway. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. The basement was dark, the old wooden steps steep and uneven. "David, maybe we should wait until—" "Don't be ridiculous," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It'll just take a second." He opened the door. The stairs descended into shadow. I took the first step, gripping the railing, and that's when I felt it, his hand on my back, firm and deliberate. Not a touch, a push. The world tilted. My foot missed the step. I remembered the sensation of falling, the sharp edges of the stairs, the crack of my leg hitting wood. Pain exploded through me, bright and consuming. I hit the concrete floor at the bottom and lay there, gasping, unable to move. Above me, I heard gasps. Someone screamed. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. But through the chaos, I heard two things clearly. David's voice, shaking and theatrical, calling for help, and underneath it, quieter, almost inaudible, Constance's voice. Finally. The paramedics arrived within minutes. I remember hands lifting me onto a stretcher, the stabbing pain in my leg, the fluorescent lights of the ambulance. David rode with me, holding my hand, his face a mask of concern. "She just slipped," he told the paramedic. "She's always been clumsy. She doesn't watch where she's going." Clumsy. The word felt like a brand. At the hospital, they told me my leg was broken in 2 places. I'd need surgery, pins, months of physical therapy. David stayed by my side, texting on his phone, ordering the nurses around, playing the devoted husband. But when the surgeon pulled him aside to discuss my care, I saw Constance slip into the hallway and speak to him quietly. Whatever she said made his face go pale. I spent the night in the hospital, drifting in and out of medicated sleep. David went home to clean up from the party, he said. I didn't argue. Part of me was relieved to be alone. The next morning, as I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Chen?" A woman's voice, professional and careful. "This is Amanda Liu from Pinnacle Insurance. I'm calling about your life insurance policy." My stomach tightened. "I didn't call about my policy." "I know. That's why I'm calling you. Mrs. Chen, did you authorize an increase to your coverage last month?" I felt cold suddenly, despite the warm hospital room. "What increase?" There was a pause. "Your policy was increased from $500,000 to $2 million. The change was submitted electronically with your signature, but our system flagged it because—" She hesitated. "Because you're the third person connected to your husband to have a major policy increase in the past 6 years." The room seemed to shrink. Third person? His first wife, Melissa Chen, and his mother's sister, Patricia Huang, both had substantial policy increases shortly before they died in accidents. I couldn't breathe. What kind of accidents? Melissa fell downstairs and suffered a fatal head injury. Patricia drowned in her bathtub after a suspected seizure. Both deaths were ruled accidental. But another pause. "Mrs. Chen, given your recent injury and the pattern we've identified, I felt obligated to reach out. I've also contacted the authorities." I hung up, hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. My mind raced through the past year, the sudden affection, the life insurance papers, David's insistence on hosting the party, the way Constance had looked at me last night. Finally, they hadn't been planning a celebration. They'd been planning a funeral. Mine. A soft knock interrupted my spiral. Detective Maria Santos stepped into the room, badge in hand. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes, and the posture of someone who'd seen too much. "Mrs. Chen, I'm with the Boston PD. May I ask you some questions about last night?" I nodded, unable to speak. She sat beside my bed and opened a small notebook. "Walk me through what happened before you fell." I told her everything. The party, the basement, David's hand on my back. My voice shook as I described the push, the deliberate pressure, the way it felt nothing like an accident. Detective Santos wrote quietly, her expression neutral. When I finished, she looked up. "Mrs. Chen, are you aware that your husband's first wife died 5 years ago?" "He told me it was a tragic accident," I whispered, "that she fell." "She did fall, down the basement stairs in their previous home." Santos let that sink in. "And his aunt, Patricia Huang, drowned in her bathtub 2 years after that. Both women had recently increased their life insurance policies, with your husband as the beneficiary." Nausea rolled through me. Why wasn't he investigated? "He was," Santos said, "but there wasn't enough evidence. The deaths looked accidental. No witnesses, no clear motive beyond the money, which wasn't enough to charge him, and his mother provided alibis for both incidents." She paused. "But this time is different. This time, you survived, and this time there were 20 witnesses." "They didn't see him push me," I said. "It was too crowded, too dark." "Maybe not," Santos said, "but we're going to look at everything. Your home security cameras, your financial records, witness statements, and we're exhuming Melissa's body to re-examine the autopsy findings." My breath caught. "You think he killed her?" Santos met my eyes, and in them I saw absolute certainty. "I think your husband is a patient, calculated killer, and I think his mother has been helping him." Over the next week, I stayed in the hospital recovering from surgery while Detective Santos built her case. She visited daily, updating me on what they'd found. Each revelation felt like another blow. David had meticulously planned everything. The insurance increase had been forged with my signature using a document I'd signed for something else. The party had been timed precisely 6 weeks after the policy went into effect, past the contestability period, and security footage from our home, which David didn't know I'd secretly installed after a break-in scare, showed him and Constance in the basement 2 days before the party, adjusting the railing, loosening screws, making the stairs deliberately dangerous. But the most damning evidence came from Constance's home. When police executed a search warrant, they found a locked file cabinet containing journals, dozens of them dating back 20 years. Constance had documented everything: her disappointment in David's first marriage, her plans to help him fix the mistake, detailed notes on Melissa's routines and vulnerabilities, and after Melissa's death, notes on me. Lily suspects nothing. She trusts him completely. The policy increase went through without question. The dinner party will be perfect. Reading those words, written in Constance's elegant handwriting, made my skin crawl. I wasn't a person to her. I was an obstacle, a problem to be solved. Santos brought me another piece of evidence, a recording from the dinner party. One of our guests had been filming on their phone, capturing the moment I fell. In the video, you could see David's hand on my back, see the deliberate pressure, see him step back quickly as I tumbled down. And in the background, barely visible, Constance, watching with an expression that wasn't shock, it was satisfaction. 10 days after the fall, David was arrested at his office. Constance was taken into custody the same morning. I watched the news footage from my hospital bed, David in handcuffs, his face a mask of outrage, shouting about false accusations and conspiracies. Constance, silent and cold, staring straight ahead, as if none of this touched her. But it wasn't over. David hired the best defense attorney money could buy. He claimed I was unstable, that I'd been drinking too much at the party, that I'd slipped on my own. He painted himself as a devoted husband, devastated by false accusations. And Constance maintained that she'd simply been a concerned mother, that the journals were creative writing, that the security footage was misinterpreted. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I sat in the courtroom day after day, my legs still in a brace, listening to David lie under oath, listening to his attorney attack my character, my credibility, my memory of that night. But Santos and the prosecution had built an airtight case. They brought in Melissa's sister, who testified about the strange circumstances of her death, the way David had pushed for a quick cremation, the way Constance had been oddly cheerful at the funeral. They brought in a forensics expert who analyzed the security footage frame by frame, showing the biomechanics of the push. They brought in a financial analyst who traced the money from both previous deaths, how David had lived extravagantly for years on insurance payouts, how he'd been facing bankruptcy before our marriage. And they brought in the insurance investigator, Amanda Liu, who testified about the pattern she'd identified, the red flags that had been missed, the way David had refined his method with each victim. The most devastating testimony came from David's business partner, who reluctantly admitted that David had joked about his lucky accidents over drinks one night. He said, "Some men inherit money, but he created opportunities," the partner testified, his voice shaking. "I thought he was talking about investments. I didn't realize he meant his wives." When the verdict came in, I was sitting beside my parents in the courtroom, guilty on all counts: attempted murder, insurance fraud, and after the exhumation revealed new evidence, 2 counts of first-degree murder for Melissa and Patricia. Constance was convicted as an accessory to all 3 crimes. David's face went white. Constance finally showed emotion, not remorse, but fury. Pure, incandescent rage that I had survived, that I had ruined everything. As they were led away, David turned back to look at me one last time. His expression was empty, as if I were already dead to him, as if I'd never been real. The sentencing came a month later. David received life without parole. Constance got 30 years. The judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom. "You treated human beings as financial instruments. You cultivated trust for the sole purpose of exploitation and murder. You have shown no remorse, no humanity. May you never know freedom again." I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying in the months before. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: lightness, as if a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there had finally lifted. The civil suits came next. I sued David's estate for damages. The insurance companies sued to recover the payouts from Melissa's and Patricia's deaths. David's assets were frozen, seized, distributed to victims and their families. The townhouse in Beacon Hill was sold. Every trace of our life together was dismantled piece by piece. My parents insisted I move back home to recover, but I couldn't. I needed distance, space to rebuild without ghosts haunting me. So I moved to Portland, found a small apartment near the water, and started over. Physical therapy was grueling. My leg would never be the same. I walked with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of the night David tried to kill me. But that limp also reminded me I was alive, that I'd survived something designed to destroy me. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others recognize the signs I'd missed: the subtle control disguised as care, the isolation from friends and family, the financial manipulation, the way abuse could wear the mask of love until it was too late. And slowly, carefully, I learned to trust again. Not quickly, not easily, but in small moments: a coffee with a colleague, a friendship that asked nothing in return, the kindness of strangers who helped me carry groceries when my leg ached. A year after the trial, Detective Santos called. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "David's appealing the conviction. It won't go anywhere, but his lawyer is required to try." "Let him appeal," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Let him spend the rest of his life in a cell arguing with lawyers. I'm done giving him space in my head. There was a smile in Santos's voice when she replied, "Good, that's exactly where you should be." 2 years after the dinner party, I stood in the garden of a small house I'd bought in Portland. The house needed work. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, the floors creaked. But it was mine. Fully, completely mine. No one had helped me buy it. No one had a key. No one whispered that I was lucky to have it. I planted roses that spring, the same kind my mother grew when I was a child. As I worked the soil, my hands dirty and my leg aching, I thought about Melissa and Patricia, the women who hadn't survived David's patient cruelty, the women whose deaths had been dismissed as accidents because they happened behind closed doors in houses that looked perfect from the outside. I thought about how many times I'd been told I was sensitive, dramatic, clumsy. How many times I'd apologized for bruises I didn't cause, for fears that turned out to be survival instincts, for trusting less than I should have. And I thought about the moment at the top of those basement stairs, the split second when David's hand pressed into my back and I knew with absolute certainty what he intended. That knowing had saved my life, not the insurance investigator, not the detective, not the security footage. My own instinct, finally listened to, finally trusted. Some people say you should forgive to move on, but I've learned that survival doesn't require forgiveness. It requires truth. It requires saying out loud what happened and refusing to minimize it. It requires building a life where you're not waiting for the next push, the next accident, the next moment someone tries to erase you. I still have nightmares sometimes. I wake up falling, heart racing, leg throbbing with phantom pain. But then I open my eyes and see my bedroom, my house, my life. And I remember that David lost. Not because I was strong or brave or special, but because I survived long enough for the truth to catch up with him. The roses bloomed that summer, deep red and fragrant, climbing the trellis I'd built myself. I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light filter through the leaves, and felt something I'd never felt in the townhouse with David. Peace. Real, uncomplicated, hard-won peace. And if you're reading this from a place that doesn't feel safe, if you're explaining away bruises and minimizing fears and wondering if you're imagining things, know this. Your instincts are trying to save you. Listen to them, trust them, and know that survival isn't just about escaping. It's about building a life where you're not waiting for the next push, the next accident, the next moment someone tries to erase you. Share your story below if you've walked this path. And if you want more stories of survival and truth, subscribe. You're not alone. You never were. The truth doesn't just set you free, it keeps you alive.